Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's returning conversant is Dr. Debra Soh. She used to write for Playboy and now is an author in her own right. Her first book was Beyond Gender. She studied the fallout of gender ideology. Now she's here to plug her new book, Sextinction, which talks about the sex recession within modern Western society. In this conversation, we talk about her book and her research and how her opinions have changed from her days as a sex-positive sexologist to somebody who's a little critical or skeptical of the popular promotion of unfettered sexuality. You can find her book linked in the description, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Dr. Debra Soh. What was the process of writing this?
Oh, it was exciting. I mean, this is my second book, and I appreciate you having me back on to talk about it.
Absolutely.
I really wanted to make sure that the subject I chose for my second book would appeal to my readers and that it'd be interesting, that'd be useful for them. Like I could provide them information that they could use in their own life. So I had been hearing about this so-called sex recession. There's a study that was published back in 2016. That was really the first time that data were speaking to this unusual trend that was happening in terms of people having less sex. And that particular study showed that in Americans, they used data from the General Social Survey. So that's a survey that's nationally representative. They do a sample every couple of years since I believe it was the 70s. And so they were showing that for the first time ever, millennials were more likely than any previous generation to have zero sexual partners by the age of 20. And this trend was predicted to continue on for Gen Z, which was the next up and coming generation. So at the time, I didn't really think much of it. I thought, this could have just been one fluke finding. Who knows? It might even out in the years to come. But then more studies started coming out showing the same trend. And then roughly what we see across a number of data sets is that 1 in 3 men and 1 in 5 women have not had sex in the past year. And this is especially pronounced among millennials and Gen Z. So I was excited with this book to finally get the chance to sit down and go through the data myself and determine, is this actually something that's happening? And if it is happening, why is it happening? And instead of having sex, like my interest in sexuality is partially because I used to study it scientifically, but then also because sex is a representation of emotional intimacy and connection more broadly in society. So to me, if people are not interested in sex and people aren't interested in dating, there was one recent poll from Pew that showed that over half of single people have no interest in dating right now. So I'm thinking, okay, what is taking the place of sexual activity? So each chapter in Sextinction goes into a potential explanation or reason why I think people are turning away from interest in sex and potentially the damage that this is going to cause. Because if you come at it from a biological or evolutionary perspective, many of these, say, technologies or policies that have been put into place may look good for the short term, or they may fulfill our needs short term, or might serve as a very effective distraction to help us cope or feel better or self-regulate, that type of thing. But down the road, it's going to lead us to negative repercussions. And especially with regard to the sex recession, this increasing problem or divide between men and women, and the fact that women are on average outperforming their male peers, both in terms of education and occupation. So women being hypergamous, they prefer to marry up. So if there are few successful men, there's no one for them to marry. And then what you see instead is that, I think especially extreme feminists are saying, well, the fact that we are single, unmarried is actually a good thing. And having a boyfriend now is cringy. And then you have men going the opposite direction saying, well, we don't need women. We're going to use sex robots and AI girlfriends and whatever. So each of those technologies are covered in Sextinction as well. And I go in and I test each of them out, which was my favorite thing to do. It was a lot of fun actually to go and try out the different technologies and report on what I think it's about and if it's actually realistic.
What's the methodology for you checking things out?
People are going to be, some people might be very excited, but no, it's not as titillating as it probably sounds. I did try to make a sex robot in my likeness. That was one chapter. And I went through the scientific research showing what do we know about sex robots and that technology, also sex dolls, which is basically the precursor for the modern day sex robot. And then say with AI girlfriends and boyfriends, I went in and I made dozens of these AI friends and tested them out across all the different platforms to see, would I consider dating someone like an AI companion instead of a real life person. And I do think I can totally see why people do it. It really frightened me actually how realistic they were.
Yeah.
What other technologies did I try out? I went to a plastic surgeon to get a consult in terms of because plastic surgery is like almost status quo nowadays, right? Especially among young women. I find it very concerning that especially girls who are in their prime, their late teens, early 20s, they don't need to get anything done. And living in a large urban city, I see so many young women who have so much work done. And I'm just thinking, what's happening here? And who did this to you? So, and that chapter about plastic surgery also speaks to the reasons why women gravitate toward these trends, but also the fact that this ideology around perfecting your looks and that your looks are the most important thing is spreading to young men as well. And I talk about muscle dysmorphia and looks maxing in particular, because that really has a hold on young men. So the same, I think, trends on social media and that same toxicity is affecting Gen Z and younger, Gen Alpha as well, which is roughly age 14 and younger, 13 and younger. But it's attaching them, the ideologies attaching onto them in slightly different ways. I don't think enough has really been talked about how young men are being affected by social media in terms of their body image and that as well. But yeah, I have a chapter on social media, dating apps, pornography. That's another one. I think people be very surprised at my views on porn because they've changed a lot since the start of my journalistic career.
Yeah.
And what else did I try out? Oh, and then I have a chapter on endocrine disruptors as well. And I talk about
when you were talking in your intro, I was thinking, well, there's diet and there's media. Those are probably two of the main factors, or culture and diet.
Yeah, for sure. But
And
the
we know
crazy
that could you fill in, there's talk a lot about like hormones are changing, like there's a drop in testosterone. Have you solidified that research? Is that something that is happening? And what would we expect to be the result?
Yeah, so another piece of the puzzle is, like you're saying, men's declining testosterone. So there has been this trend over the last 50 years, I would say, specifically within the last 20 years, it's become a lot more prevalent in that men's testosterone is declining. So testosterone is very powerful in men's bodies. It gives them motivation, it gives them drive, not just sexual drive, but just like the drive to achieve. It makes them more risk averse, less fearful of risk. So they're more likely to take chances, like go ask a woman out on a date, want to strive for success. And I think also when you remove the romantic piece in a man's life, he has less of a reason to want to better himself because he's not worried about trying to impress anyone. He's not looking to better his life to help accommodate or provide for a partner, right? And potentially start a family. So in our environment, there are numerous toxins that are leading to lower testosterone levels. It's interesting because there was one large study done that looked at factors like age, lifestyle, including diet, smoking, drinking, smoking cannabis. What other factors were there? And they still said there's something else going on here. It's not covered by these factors. There's something environmental. There's something specific to the time period that we are in that is leading to this decrease in testosterone. There are also chemicals in the environment, so like xenoestrogen. So you could have some foods that naturally have soy in them or estrogen. They're called phytoestrogens. And then you also have synthetic ones like we see in plastics, pesticides. The animal literature, so the animal research literature was my favorite thing to go through because it is so astounding. Because when you read these studies, people will call you a conspiracy theorist if you say there are toxins in the environment that are affecting our hormones. But once you go in and you read these studies yourself, you see, wow, that people are not exaggerating. Because I used to work with animal models in research, and I loved it because I would always say animals don't lie. Animals are not going to forget that they ate something or that they took this drug, or they're going to hide certain things from you because they don't want you to think poorly of them for whatever reason in terms of social desirability. Animals are not going to do that. So if you find a result in a sample of animals, whether it's in the wild or in the lab, you know what you found is pretty much legit. It's not due to social factors or confounding factors. So when you look at research around, I'm sure you've heard about the frogs that are exposed to atrazine. So you've male frogs, they're exposed, and for your audience, they may have heard about this. So I'll just very briefly say that if they're exposed to this pesticide that turns them into females, they will actually start laying eggs and copulating with male frogs. So that's not a conspiracy theorist. I read that paper probably 6 times. I couldn't believe it. I said, this is actually happening. And the same thing with There's a breed of Japanese fish. And what they did was they exposed it to diazepam, which is an anxiolytic. So it's basically like anti-anxiety medication. And what they found is these fish just were so lethargic and they were not interested in mating at all, to the point where the researchers said this could cause real damage at a population level, that this species might go extinct because these fish are being exposed to this in wastewater or say through pharmaceutical, discharge. So when you think about at a larger level with human beings, why should we have any reason to think that these toxins are not affecting us? Even if it's at a smaller scale, I have a hard time believing that there's no effect at all. And the fact that it is so taboo to do this research, or you get considered, they call you like a right-wing crazy person if you talk about this stuff.
Really?
Well, it depends on what side of the aisle you're on. I
Yeah.
think a mainstream reportage still to some degree dismisses it, although I see them slowly coming around. But I definitely think the low testosterone is a big piece to it, because even if we correct for social policies like DEI, or if we offer more support in education and in the workplace, there is still going to be an unaddressed factor that's very powerful. And that if men don't feel good about themselves, if they have low mood, say they're depressed, or they just don't feel comfortable in their bodies, or they're putting food into their bodies, and men and women are putting food into their bodies that are not good for them, then you're not going to be able to solve this issue of people being disinterested in connecting, in having relationships, and even in terms of fertility. Even if you do manage to couple up, you might find that you aren't able to have children if you want to have them.
Yeah. The aspect of sexuality that is central to sexuality, one would think psychologically, is this aspect of connection. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what's been eroded through our media landscape, through the fear of connection, through safetyism, through lawfare, through our changing ideas of marriage, through the opening of marriage to any variation of combinations. How do you formulate, not necessarily scientifically, well, I do want to understand why you think you've changed in your views on sex, but how does one represent connection as the foundation or the key aspect of sex, rather than just this stimulation or this biological action? There's this human element that you need to bring back into the discussion. How have you managed to do that?
Well, I think previously, like when I started writing as a journalist, coming from my background in sex research, I was operating much more from a quote sex positive view, in that any permutation of sexuality is healthy as long as it's consensual. That was my view previously, and that sex is divorced from love, and that we shouldn't judge people with aberrant sexual preferences. It's no one's place to judge. I still feel that to some extent, but I think we should be honest about what is driving those interests and what should be done in terms of, say, therapeutic approaches, as opposed to saying people should be able to do whatever they want, again, if it's consensual. So I've become very critical of kink and BDSM, which, I previously was studying paraphilic disorders, which are abnormal sexual preferences. And I recognize that in many cases, these sexual preferences are due to adverse childhood experiences, and they're not so much just like a fun thing that people choose to do. So they're an
expression of brokenness
pathology,
or pain or pathology. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically like the eroticization of physical pain. So people who are into kink and BDSM more likely to have experiences of physical abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, trauma in childhood, which is very unfortunate. And I went back and actually looked at data I had collected when I was in the field and found similar results in my own data. So I was really astounded by that. So yeah, I think my realization that, that human connection, intimacy part is important. Well, if you think about it evolutionarily, again, I don't believe that everyone has to have children if they don't want to, but in terms of the reason for sex, it is to procreate and to pass on your genes and to create a bond with your partner so that both of you will be invested in raising that child or your children. It's not going to be good for the child's development if one parent or both parents are not happy with the other partner, because they recognize that child shares half of the DNA of that other partner. Yeah. And so it's also better for a child to be raised with both parents. Both sex roles are necessary and very important. I do think for, say, same-sex couples, like if you have a opposite, or say it's two men. If you have a female mentor, if you have two women, you have a male mentor, male family member, female family member, someone to take the role of the opposite sex in raising that child. I think that could really help. But for myself, again, going through the research data and seeing this is not just old-fashioned way of thinking to say that a child needs two parents and that they need a man, a woman, or rather a mother and a father. But there are specific reasons and roles that the child will take away from having parents of both sexes. And when you have fatherlessness or if you have motherlessness, that can cause some real issues. And I go into that more depth in the book, but
Yeah.
that was part of my realization. But also for me, it's just basically, again, sitting down and reading the research and being really objective and asking myself, how much of my views come from what's subjectively in the research, or how much is it from being in the field and knowing that there's a certain ideology also being in the field and being in academia that you have to be honest with yourself. And if you acknowledge that and you still come away with the same conclusions, that's one thing. But also when I started posting about this on social media, while I was mostly off of social media when I was writing Sextinction. I think there was one period when I just went on briefly to ask my audience, like polling them about what they thought about certain things. And when I tweeted about how, or posted about how kinks are the result of trauma, people got so angry. I was not expecting it at all. There's so much backlash. And that's when I knew. I said, it's because they know what I'm saying is true. Because if it were not true, why would you feel the need to go after someone like that and have such a strong response? So, and
That's
then
interesting
that's when
because trauma is kind of popularized right now. Everybody has their trauma badge. It's kind of like your access. But if it's paired with your sexuality or your orientation, then you're yucking my yum, as the phrase goes.
Right. And I do think, like with mental health lingo, it does risk being overused nowadays. And the term trauma, people refer to something being like going to the store and then being out of your favorite candy. And that's traumatic. I think that's really, flippant to overuse the term or to use it in a way that benefits you or your brand. But I think for some people, they legitimately have trauma, which is that something really awful happened to them and they relive it in their life and they are legitimately triggered, whereas something reminds them of it and it brings them back to that place and they can't get out of it. And it's very distressing. And they have, other mental health issues and problems, and more importantly, more problems in their relationship and their functioning as a result of this. And so they don't want someone like me saying, oh, by the way, this unusual thing that you're into sexually that you might take a lot of pride in is actually the result of something really awful that happened to you. Because then it makes them feel that, oh, wow, this thing that happened to me that I don't want to think about or talk about is affecting me more deeply than I had anticipated. So my goal is not to bring shame to these individuals. And even the ones who are coming after me, like some of my colleagues in sex research have. And I have no hate for them. I really truly hope that they will get the help that they need and they will feel better and recognize that it's not a threat. It's help. I think my role as a former scientist and journalist is to be as forthcoming as possible about what I uncovered, because I really truly believe that's the best way to live your life, right? Is to know what's out there as opposed to believing these narratives that are not helpful. And the other thing is with relationships, if you're with someone who is into certain things, I've had people in my audience say, I was dating someone who's into like sexual choking, which is something I talk about in Sextinction. This trend is motivated by porn. You see Gen Z women almost ubiquitously either ask for this or think that they need to ask for this during sex, even though they don't really like it. And it's dangerous and you can die. That's the most important thing. It's potentially fatal. I see people, I have had people say to me, they've dated people who are into whatever, violent sex. And they didn't think it was a red flag, but it ended up being a red flag. And so it's this misinformation that, again, if you truly believe that all sexual interests or activities are totally fine as long as they're consensual, you'll miss the red flags that are letting you know someone may not be right for you.
Yeah. How did your first book, The End of Gender, lead to this book or lay the foundation?
I have to say,
and you are obsessed with like apocalypses, sextinction, end of gender, something very fatalistic in your title.
That's hilarious. That must be a very subconscious thing. Yeah. Maybe because I see it as this is what's going to happen to me once this book comes out.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on to talk about my first book. And I appreciate the conversations you'd have with detransitioners, because those conversations really haunted me after. They really, really did. And they stayed with me, and they informed many of the chapters in Sextinction, because especially I would say what young women were telling me about their experiences online in terms of social media, in terms of the way that porn has influenced them and the way they view sexuality, and also body image, so plastic surgery trends. So what I mean by that is many of these young women who decided that they didn't want to be female, wanted to either live as men or non-binary or some other mythical gender that's not womanhood, or not associated with womanhood. It was due to spending so much time on social media, as we know, right? It being a social contagion, but then also seeing these images of very sexy, voluptuous women who seem to really revel in getting a lot of male attention that in many cases is lewd. And, like it's almost like their entire value as a human being, it revolves around their sex appeal and having millions of weird men commenting on their posts and writing degrading things. And so these young women would say to me, I would not like that. I don't look like that. I don't want to look like that. Even if I did, I couldn't look like that, usually because influencers or porn stars have lots of plastic surgery too. But they said, okay, if I don't want to be that, maybe I'll have an easier time being a boy, or maybe that really means I am a boy, or being exposed to porn at such a young age. Like nowadays, most kids will view porn by the age of 12, if not younger. Some kids, 1 in 7 kids sees it at age 10 or younger. And I wouldn't be surprised if that number is still increasing because like kids are getting access to phones and devices at younger and younger ages. But so you're seeing porn even before your first orgasm, and you're thinking, okay, as a woman, men want to choke me. I'm going to be degraded and called names and beaten up. I don't want that. So I must not be a woman. Or if I'm going to have sex, I'm going to be in the male role having sex, or maybe I just won't have sex at all. Right. And then going into the plastic surgery piece, it's also, I think gender dysphoric girls are going to go the route of, transitioning, right? Going for procedures that will make them look either male or non-binary, whereas gender conforming girls are going into this route of getting plastic surgery that is lip filler, facial filler, the fox eye thread, getting buccal fat removal. That's not as trendy now. It's turning more into like facelifts or mini facelifts, more subtle procedures. For a while, it was that very sculpted look. So it keeps changing every, 5-10 years. And especially with Gen Z girls, like they really don't need it. So how my first book informed me, I guess most importantly is I really stand by everything in that book. So The End of Gender came out in 2020. Everything was factual. I stand by everything I said to this day. I'm glad to see that people are more and more really not afraid to say what they think about that nonsense in terms of gender ideology. But I think the only thing I took away from that book that I wish I'd done differently was that I had been a little bit more strident, because I really was trying so hard to speak to the activists and try to say to them, like, really, you don't need to find what I'm saying to be a threat. And I realized some people are just so possessed that you can't get through to them, or they're financially incentivized. They will not take any olive branch you offer. So I think it's good to be open-minded and to be compassionate and to be willing to meet people halfway if they are reasonable. If they are unreasonable, then no. You do the best you can and you move on.
Yeah. Well, you knew you were poking a bear with The End of Gender, and I'm sure you knew there was a bear that was being poked, maybe one of several in Sextinction. What were some of the voices that you had to not appease, the outside critics, that you had to just accept that they're probably going to come after you in one way or another? And then, because that shows you something about the conversation that you're not supposed to be having that needs to be had, that resistance even imagined.
I would say criticizing sex positivity at all is seen as like very taboo within sexuality research, because most sexuality researchers, I shouldn't say that, I definitely still have friends and colleagues in the field who do good work. They're not super woke. They just put their head down and they do their research, and they're legitimate scientists. But I would say the people you see who are the ones who are considered so-called sexuality experts tend to be very woke, very progressive. They will never criticize any of this stuff. So especially with regard to, say, the sex recession, some of them will say, yes, it's happening, but they'll say, oh, it's a good thing. Young people are making better decisions about their sexuality. So pregnancy, in terms of teen pregnancy, rates have gone down, but sexually transmitted infections in teenagers has skyrocketed, especially around, things like syphilis, chlamydia, gonorrhea.
So sex is happening.
I mean, it's not as much as previously, but it looks like the sex that is happening is not safe or healthy. And then the other piece of that is some experts will say there is no sex recession happening. This is just people kicking up a fuss, which I find so strange, because you think if you're, quote, sex positive, if people are not having sex, that should be a concern. So now it's weird because they're saying asexuality and sexlessness is a good thing. And then it's so bizarre because the other piece of that is because young men are falling behind, young men are the ones. I would argue that young women are struggling to find partners too, but the way the calculations form in their minds and say these young progressive women or say young female journalists is that young female progressive journalists is that if there are fewer men succeeding or fewer men can have access to sex, these men are all going to be fighting over the women. And so the women are going to have their pick of the lot. But the reality is these women are not going to be interested in those guys who are not able to find a partner. These women are going to be wanting to marry up. So they're going to be interested in the more successful men. And those men, because there are fewer of them, have more choices and they're not going to want to settle down with anyone. Or if they do, they will settle down with multiple women in succession. So they'll have one family, then, whatever, decide they're going to move on, get married, get a second wife, have a second family, move on, get a third
The
wife,
latest
move on.
model. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I think, it's silly to sit here and say, oh, it's totally fine if people are sexless. Also, if you look at mental health rates, 5% of the global population is depressed right now. And Gen Z is, half of Gen Z has a diagnosed mental health condition. 90% of them have anxiety. So I don't think that we're doing so well collectively right now. It's not like everyone is, over the moon having the best time. I think this is the sexlessness aspect is a symptom of a larger problem that really needs to be talked about.
It's kind of scary. You're bringing up so much. There's the culture, there's the gay frogs in the water, there's health, there's different political pressures and stuff. So if you really needed to hone down to one or two things on a legislative level, if it was possible, would you introduce age restrictions to porn or something like that? Like, is there, from a top down level, like what's a category of issue in the sexuality aspect of our culture that needs some intervention, like straight on, like if you're just honest with yourself?
Yeah, I would say it's not so much specific to sexuality, but definitely get rid of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. We have to let men have a fair chance at succeeding. One, it's discrimination. The fact that, in Sextinction, I go through a number of examples that anecdotes colleagues have told me. I've had numerous male colleagues tell me in academia, they're professors and they will say, white men are told not to apply for job positions because there's no chance they're going to get hired. The hiring committee is specifically hiring for women and minorities or people of other specific identity markers. So to me, your physical attributes, your identity characteristics have no bearing on your ability to produce good scientific research. So why does that even matter? So that is one, doing society in. If you're choosing people based on their physical characteristics as opposed to their intelligence and their work ethic and their merit, or even publication count, which is your productivity as a scientist. They apparently don't even look at that anymore, which is insane to me. So that's not going to be good for us moving forward in terms of surviving as a species and knowledge. But then also in this larger question about mating and dating, right? This problem is only going to get worse. Women are not going to stop being hypergamous. Although there are all these band-aid solutions that I talk about in Sextinction in terms of telling women, oh, be okay to marry a man who makes less than you or who is a stay-at-home father or just doesn't work at all, is a house husband, it's totally fine. There's some women are okay with that, and I totally salute you. Everyone is different. But by and large, what you see in those marriages is a lot of resentment. The women end up filing for divorce. And I think also the men in those situations, they know they're not fully, proud of themselves and that they don't really have anything meaningful going on in their life. And so the other piece to that I would say is, I wouldn't say banning porn. I think I would like to see more done in terms of intervention, though. Like previously, I took a very libertarian approach. Was that I think let the parents handle it, but parents are so busy, and realistically, kids now are they're seeing it so young, and you can't be with your child all the time, unfortunately, to know exactly what they're looking at all day long. So I get it makes people uncomfortable, especially conversations about digital IDs and government surveillance. The minute you start saying, well, what about people don't want to put in their personal information to be verified because they don't want porn sites obviously know anything about them. So I do think
Yeah.
something larger needs to be done because this conversation has been going on for a while and I don't see it getting better. And last, or I'll let you, what do you want to say?
No, I wanted to drill into the effect that porn has. It's basically if you could take a moralistic stance, or you could take like kind of a semi-moralistic stance and say that this generation is being sexually abused. It's passive sexual abuse, but it is sexual
Mm-hmm.
abuse. But you'd need to understand why exposure to erotic material has an impact on somebody's psyche. So has to be a reintroduction of a psychological or meaningful aspect to sexuality, especially in
Mm,
porn, for it
yeah,
to say this. I'm really sorry. I have
that's okay.
a frog in my throat. So how do you approach, or is there research that says that pornography has a developmental impact?
In terms of, there is a research literature showing that it affects, say, how young people view their bodies. It affects their decision making. These studies were done prior to the real mainstreaming or popularity of online porn. So I can only imagine how much worse it's gotten because nowadays you can go, like I personally don't watch porn, but when I go on to look for, whatever for research purposes, I'm amazed as a grown woman because I find a lot of it very shocking. And I think if it has this effect on me as an adult, what is it like for an unsuspecting child? Because most children, the first time they see it, they don't know what it is, and it's very frightening for them.
Yeah.
So developmentally, kids who are exposed to porn at a young age, like you said, nowadays I would consider it a form of grooming. The fact that kids are just stumbling upon it at all ages without any warning. But also, I would say adults will use pornography as a way to actually groom children with the goal of abusing them. So kids who are exposed to porn also tend to partake in riskier sex. So they'll have sex without contraception while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And I think going back to that piece about the emotional connection, if you as a child view porn and think this is representative of real life sex, as many of these kids do, because most kids can't really differentiate between what they're seeing on a screen and what's happening in real life until say 7 or 8 years old. So
Yeah.
they think, okay, this is really happening. This is not people acting or whatever. Then they think, okay, what's completely absent is any interpersonal communication, like genuine connection, communication, boundaries, the realization that the other person has their own needs and wants, not just you. It's not about you getting the quickest orgasm the easiest way possible.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
also, I would say for boys, when they finish looking at porn, nothing else is required of them. Whereas if you have a real life partner, a woman is going to want you to cuddle and, hold her after and be kind to her and show her that you care about her. I mean, men want that too, but I think for women especially, they feel much more vulnerable after sex because there's a larger release of oxytocin.
Yeah.
Whereas for men, the hormones that are involved in sexual bonding, they go back down to zero after ejaculation. So it's very different for men and women in terms of their sexual experiences. So
Yeah.
that's part of it too. And if there's no conversation around that with kids who see this, unfortunately, when they do start dating or having their first sexual experiences in adulthood, hopefully it's not until adulthood, they're going to be at a complete loss. It's going to be like a completely different language. They're not going to know how to interact with each other. And I think that is part of also why we see this huge disinterest in both sexes, and both sexes also demonizing each other and saying,
Yeah.
you are the reason, you are the fault for all the problems we're having, not just in dating, but in the world. And we want nothing to do with you.
It brings up the question of sex education, and just the whole education edifice itself needs to be reformed, if you ask me. But sex education itself is very lacking, and the conservatives or the Christians in our culture wanted to keep it out of schools, so they lost the ground, they gave up the ground, and then the schools have been captured by this sex positivity thing. So I'm wondering if that's what you would advocate for like a reformation of what sex education should be, and like where do you begin with the attitude towards sex?
I previously was very much in favor of sex education in schools. And then when all that crazy woke drag queen stuff started happening, all the gender stuff started
Yeah.
happening, I said, no way, no way, this needs to stop. If it could go back to something that is purely based in just biology and facts, no politics, no rainbow. Like, and listen, I love gay men and women, but like the rainbow does not need to be in the classroom, right? Just
Mm.
Just teach kids the basics, very like fundamental, without this agenda. That would be ideal, but I don't know that we'll ever get back to that. I think too much damage has been done by trans activism, and they will never give it up. They will never give up
Huh.
the ground that they have gained. They will cling to it for as long as possible. And even as it's being like ripped from their hands, they are still going to cling to it. So I just don't feel like, I really think the best thing is for parents to just be the primary source of education.
Okay.
And parents are not perfect, understandably. And I respect the parents out there who say, I'm not sure where to even start with this. Maybe that'll be my next book. Who knows? But,
Well, I
I
mean, I'm
think,
sure you could do a workbook based on this with all your research that would be aimed towards parents. You could just retrofit the the frame of what you're talking about.
yeah, I mean, if there's a demand, you guys let me know. But please support Sextinction because that will
Yes.
help me justify to my publisher why I should get to do this
Yeah.
next book.
Yeah.
But in Sextinction, I do talk about like how education has been so damaging in this way, and that the sex positivity aspect, the progressivism that has been ushered into the education system, how it gets kids at such a young age, and parents don't know. I think only really in the last couple of years, with as much as I'm critical of social media has been helpful to allow parents to see what is really going on in the classroom. So yeah, I would say like just read biology textbooks, read my first book, textbooks from say like 30 years ago might still be objective.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's, tell your kids that porn is not representative of sex and that they should stay away from it for as long as possible.
Yeah. Well, there's
Yeah.
porn, which is a huge issue, but then there's these other technologies. How do men and women, how are they interacting with these different technologies? You said plastic surgery is one, and men are kind of picking up on that. But with these AI chatbots,
Mhm.
these robots, what's the difference between a robot and a doll, I guess? But it's more the AI stuff. Like who is and how is it being sculpted differently for male and female?
I would say, well, currently the AI companions, men use this technology more so than women, but I do think it's going to become more popular with women over time because the AI companions really do conform to your emotional needs. So I'll just very briefly explain what they're like. So when you go on, you pick what the AI is going to look like, you give them a name, you pick their voice, you can talk to them like it's a phone call, or you can text with them. And like I said, I tried out a bunch and I couldn't believe how realistic they were. Like it actually left me pretty spooked in a couple of occasions because I thought if I hadn't known this was an AI, I would have thought, have you tried them?
No.
They sound like real people. Yeah, no, it's
Really?
crazy.
Huh.
And so if you don't like what the AI says to you, you can just reload it and give it feedback and say, I didn't like that. Change it, say it this way, or this is what I would prefer. This is the backstory we have. So I want you to talk to me as though we have had these experiences together. And so there are people out there who are choosing AI companions either as a romantic partner or as a friend, but in place of real life people. Some people will say, I don't want to deal with human beings. I much prefer this technology,
Yeah.
which is sad. And again, it can become something that people are dependent on. They'll fall in love with the bot. They will create a life story with the bot. They'll share their bot on social media. They'll take their bot to social events if they do go. And then so when you have the sex doll / sex robot, that technology is moving along as well. And so when you put those two things together, for men, I think because they have more of an emphasis on the visual aspect of sexuality, so you can create your preferred AI partner, implant that into a robot, say, and then engage with it sexually. Women are not as dependent on a sex doll or sex robot because access to sex is much easier for them. It may not be with necessarily the level of partner that they're hoping to attain, but for women, like I say in the book, you could probably go outside and pick a man at random and proposition him. And there's a pretty good chance he'll say yes. Whereas men, you cannot do that. If men do that, they'll end up on the sex offender registry.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah. Yeah.
if it's a good day. So,
Yeah. Depends on
but in
how
turn,
handsome they are too.
yeah, but I would even say, there's another part to your question that I'm trying to think what it was in terms of,
Just
plastic
how they're
surgery.
different. Oh yeah.
The plastic surgery aspect. So yeah, in terms of, I think with social media, it's made everyone, and filters, it's made everyone believe Photoshopping, not specific to Photoshop. There are other apps too that you can use to modify your photos and videos. And so it gives everyone this false belief that everyone is stunningly beautiful and that they too need to look this way in order to be acceptable on the dating
Yeah.
market. And so that aesthetic feeds into the AI companions and then also the sex dolls and robots because you can obviously customize what they look like, and obviously they're going to be very, very attractive. So I just want to say, like, especially for women who are concerned about aging, like, you really don't need to worry about that. You don't need to get all these crazy procedures. And in many cases, the procedures do a disservice because men don't like plastic surgery in their partners. Men find that very off-putting because plastic surgery masks a person's underlying health and fertility. And
Oh,
that's what men actually care about. They want to be able to evaluate those cues. Men, I have to say, also love MILFs. So when I was reading through like scientific research on this, it was a relief to me as well. I said, okay, so all men are secretly into MILF. So you don't have, ladies, we do not have to worry about aging. That's number one. And then the other thing is, yeah, when you get all these procedures done, it's one thing if men can't tell, but it's also a question of, I do think it makes you a little bit tougher. I think if you have a public platform and your appearance is very much part of your job, I think these procedures are understandable. I don't want to knock anyone for that. I fully understand the pressure behind that. But at the same time, I think there can be a lot of growth in accepting that we have our flaws and that we do feel insecure sometimes. And especially for younger women, I really don't think the solution to feeling uncomfortable in your body or with the way you look is to go out and get something injected in your face or to get implants. And I also talk about how porn is influencing a lot of these trends in terms of Gen Z women are getting lots of breast implants. They're getting also facial work done that has usually been seen previously only in middle-aged women because it's due to loss of facial fat, which when you're 20 something years old, even early 30s, you don't really need to be worried about that, in my
yeah,
opinion.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think also there have been studies showing that men are actually less interested in having sex with their partners after looking at social media influencers, and that women are less interested in having sex after being on social media because they feel less sexually desirable. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just like,
Huh.
it's crazy. It's
Jeez.
crazy all the
Okay.
ways, the tentacles and ways that this reaches us.
Yeah, yeah. One of the aspects of the dangers of transing oneself is that it never really ends. If you focus on trying to evade the dysphoria, it goes to the next body part, the next body part.
Mm,
And, but you see that also in plastic surgery, where it all kind of starts to everybody that keeps on having plastic surgery, they all kind of there's a uncanny valley inflection point or like
yeah,
destination that you all end up in.
they look like
So
clones.
there's no built-in limiting principle in body modification. There is a limiting principle in I guess health. You can go overboard with health, but becoming strong, like you can only make your body so strong, and a lot of people probably break their bodies down by pursuing too much
Mm,
self improvement. But there's a natural tension built in with self improvement because you're doing it for some sort of goal, whereas just becoming beautiful, like what is that beauty target? And I wonder if you've seen other cultures have these different plastic surgery destinations that everybody ends up looking the same, and if there's a Twilight Zone episode about it that's actually pretty it sell the future pretty well. Uh,
wow. I was going to say it's not really its own culture, but it's a subculture in terms of the looks maxing community. And this has
yeah,
been getting more attention more recently. But it's, yeah, for your audience who may not, I'm sure they've heard of this, but it's basically young men who are really focused on having hypermasculine facial features and also like a very masculine body type. And
yeah,
I would say the same thing to them. Like, yes, women, on average, women prefer guys who are taller and who are very chiseled and have masculine features. But the downside to that is women who want a short-term thing are going to be attracted to guys like that. Women who are looking for a long-term relationship or a long-term partner are going to be slightly put off by hypermasculinity because that is associated with aggression, cheating,
yeah. Huh.
antisociality. So it's you're gaining some things, but you're also giving up other things. And some people say, well, these young guys, they just want to sleep around. But it comes back to the same point of, well, what do you get from just sleeping around? I think both men and women could benefit from being less promiscuous. So that's another thing you can't really say as a so-called sex expert, mainstream sex expert. They'll never tell people to have less sex, right? Unless you're sexless by choice. So it's all these bizarre contradictions. But anyway,
Yeah,
I would say, for these young guys, I sense what it is that in today's society, it's so difficult for young men to get ahead. They know that the basically odds are stacked against them, especially if they're white and straight. So they're saying, well, what can I do? I can just make myself look like Super Chad or Giga Chad. And, maybe that's my way to success. But I say, just work hard. Honestly, like it sucks, but You
Yeah.
can get there. You can get there.
What did you learn about yourself writing this book?
I had a lot of fun writing it. I would say number one, like it's a much more lighthearted book than The End of Gender. I was a lot more serious, I think, also when I would talk about that book, like just publicly, because it was hard. It was really hard to read about um, the kids who were going through this, and also to talk to them and the families, especially the parents. But I think writing this book, it reminded me that I do have still like that lightheartedness in me and that happiness. I feel I'm in
Huh.
a
So you are
calmer
sex positive
place.
after all. Just sex is fun.
uh, I'll give you that. Okay, fine. That's going to get clipped, and that'll be the only thing. Debra Soh says she's still
Good.
sex
We need a
positive.
clip.
No. But yeah, the adventures, I really enjoyed them. I love that part of like the more of the investigative journalistic aspect, which I haven't had to do. I did a lot of that more at the start of my career where I would go to events and things like
Yeah.
that and report.
Okay.
So I got to do
Yeah.
that again, which I enjoyed. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sextinction, it's out presently when we publish the interview.
Yes. Thank you. Yes,
And
it's out February 10th, and you
do you
can
have a
get it
preferred
every.
way for people to buy it? Or
I
just
would say
any
you can get it everywhere that sells books. I would love it if you would support it at the retailers who supported my first book and did not pull it. Or you can go to Simon and Schuster's website, and you can also go to drdebrasoh.com.
yeah. Is there are you worried about it being banned? Or you think it'll slip through the censors?
We'll see how it goes, honestly. I think it just depends how upset people get. But at this point, I recognize it's part of, it's par for the course, and it's one of those things that's out of my control, so I just don't worry about it anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's fun. And thank you very much for coming on my show and talking about this crazy adventure you've had. I guess I don't really have any more questions. So we'll just end it there. Thank you very much, Deborah.
The one other thing I was going to add
Oh,
is if you
yeah.
want to say the solutions for society, get all the
Yes.
toxic stuff out of our food and our water and our air. That's so, so important. I think it's amazing that people are talking more about this now, but
Okay.
I really want to try and use my platform as much as I can to bring attention to that too, because I think that's a huge piece to what's going on with the problems that we're having that we may not even be aware of, because if
Yeah.
it is affecting us biologically and hormonally, how would you really know?
Yeah. And there's a lot of vested interests diverting attention from that. So that it's really interesting. You brought up DEI and the environment as important to sexuality, and what those things actually mean in our lives. Not
Yeah.
just how to get them and how to have them, but how they fit into the larger part of being a human.
Yeah, I think those vested interests are a big piece of it as well, as you said. So thank you, Benjamin. I always enjoy talking to you.
Yeah, it was fun. I'm going to end the recording.